Good afternoon, and welcome to the beginning of week 5 in Business 101. Today we're going to start on part 5 of the text, which is marketing. And there are 4 chapters in this particular area of the text. Chapter 13, helping buyers buy. Chapter 14, developing and pricing goods and services. Chapter 15, distributing products, and finally Chapter 16, promoting those products, promotion, and a few other things. As I mentioned to you in the email earlier this afternoon, we'll try to cover all 4 of these this evening. However, I am usually limited to 2 hours of time, and so if we cannot get to Chapter 16 tonight, I won't try to do part of it. If that's the case and you do your video reviews, if you only want to submit chapters 13, 14, and 15, or do reviews for those, that's fine. If you want to include chapter 16 for the video reviews, which are due next Friday evening, that's fine as well. I can adjust either way, but as I mentioned, I have a limited amount of time, and I don't know if we'll have enough time to get to chapter 16 tonight because we don't want to cut anything short. So let's look at the learning objectives for chapter 13. We're going to define marketing and apply the marketing concept to both profit and nonprofit organizations. We'll look at the 4 P's of marketing. We'll summarize the marketing research process, which is very important. Show how marketers use environmental scanning to learn about the changing market environment. Explain how marketers apply the tools of marketing segmentation, relationship marketing, and the issues around consumer behavior. And then finally, compare the business-to-business market with the consumer market. All right. So we will start here and look at the definition of marketing. And what this says is this is just all the things that marketers do for companies to reach their customers, and then as the slide says, to provide value to the customers, and to make sure that there's a relationship that is between the company, or developed, I should say, a relationship that developed between the company and its customers, between specific products that the company makes and the customers, etc. And by the way, I certainly encourage you to watch all the videos, but this relationship between the company and customer is really borne out in chapter 13 video about Energizer. Now, this is the focus of contemporary marketing. Notice that the marketing people help their customers with websites, blogs, and social networks, and things of that nature. And what they're trying to do here is they're trying to reach the customer in new and it's different ways is probably also correct, but the right way. And what I mean by the right way is that they're actually seeking out these customers by using this different type of building new relationships through this different type of marketing. Now, we could consider this promotion, and we'll talk more about that when we get to chapter 16. But the purpose here is to attract people, and many of you use Facebook and some other type of social media, and so you get a lot of these pop-up advertisements and things of that nature. So you know what I'm talking about here, and perhaps understand it a little bit better than I do. And I'm not a social media user for a whole number of reasons, and perhaps none of them good, but I just don't use social media. I find it to be intrusive to me, and I've just not been able to get the handle of it to make it work for me. But that doesn't mean to say it's not useful. When I say that, I'm only talking about me. I'm not talking about anyone else. Now we're going to go through the 4 eras of marketing And we see them here under in your text. They start on page 263, excuse me, 363. Production era, the selling era, the marketing concept era, and then the customer relationship era. So we're going to look at these just a little bit, get some kind of background on them so we understand them and can perhaps relate to them. The first bullet here about the production area is really pretty easy to understand. It's just you produce as much as you can because there's no limit to this market. And we want to get into this and produce the stuff because people are going to knock themselves down trying to buy it. Now that philosophy, if you will, can be associated with a movie several years ago, well, some years ago, Field of Dreams. Build it and they will come. Well, that's exactly what this philosophy was. And in fact, that philosophy probably isn't just around, isn't just something that we can find today because yes, there are some products that you build that people are just going to be naturally attracted to. But there's other products that are being built that people aren't naturally attracted to, so you have to make sure that you can reach the customer base. Then we went to World War II, or come after World War II actually, and a consumer boom, spending boom came along. Why? Well, in World War II, we had, or at the end of World War II, is a better way to say this, we had approximately 12 million men. Now, yes, there were some women, but the data, and we're not minuscule numbers of women, there were hundreds of thousands, but I don't think we ever got to be as large as a million. But when we talk about that era, we talk about the number of men in uniform that had to be demobilized. This was a real process. Well, a lot of these guys came home and they had a lot of money because they were given, what's the right way to say this? Credit, I suppose. They didn't always get the money. They weren't always paid on the spot. So they had this money built up, and so they were able to spend it when they came home. And even if they did have this amount of money when they came home, they wanted to spend it because they hadn't been able to spend on anything for the most part in 3 or 4 years or however long that they were in the war. I worked with a gentleman some years ago who fought in World War II and actually fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And Bob talked about coming home on a ship, and I don't know whether he actually had the amount of money he's talking about, or he won the amount of money he's talking about in card games, which happened on those ships. But he said when he got off the boat, or ship, better way, he had about $7,000. That was a lot of money in 1944. It's a lot of money today, but it certainly was a lot more money in spending power in 1945. So businesses understood that they had a ready market, and they had a market that had a heck of a lot more money than the market had a few short years ago in the depths of the Depression. So they had to make sure that they had merchandise for these people to buy. So now we've gone past the production era, and we actually had an era that the slide doesn't talk too much about, or I skipped, excuse me, the selling era. And production and the selling era are pretty much together. And it makes sense if you look at it that way. And I apologize for skipping over in that fashion. So then we have the marketing concept era. And it is followed by the customer relationship era. And they're really pretty similar, at least as far as I'm concerned. And so what we had here was the customer orientation. What that means is the business going out and finding out from the customer what he or she wants. Then we had a service orientation, which says we need to satisfy the customer. Actually, today we go a step further. We're not satisfying the customer. That is in what is being offered, giving him or her what he or she wants, and then making it to their satisfaction. So not just what they want, but making sure that it's the right product and does the right things for them. And then, as I say, today we take that a step further. We want to exceed the customer's expectations. And then finally, we had a profit orientation, which obviously means we need to make a profit. And the only way we can make a profit is by making sure we satisfy the customer, get the customer the products and services that he or she needs or wants, depending upon what that happens to be. And notice the last part of that item is that our business is going to focus on the products that return us the greatest bang for our buck. And so what that probably is going to mean in either the short run or the long run is that those products that don't return sufficient profit to us, we're not going to make anymore. We're not going to sell anymore. And there's a good reason for that, because if we can't put enough effort into those other products, we don't want to tarnish our image by putting out products that don't meet customer satisfaction. And then we've gone to the customer relationship management era, which really is taking this marketing concept era a step further. This is not only finding out what the customer wants, but finding out as much about the customer as you possibly can. And again, notice the tagline here, to exceed expectations. And I use the word tagline here not in a like a throwaway comment. I use it because it's at the end, but it's very important. And perhaps when they built this bullet, it should have been up front. No, maybe they couldn't do it that way, but so, and then again, we want to increase customer relationship. We want to have a real partnership here between customer and manufacturer, for lack of a better term. And then it gives us some examples here of companies that use a CRM, customer relationship management, to really tie into with their customers. This just talks about the mobile marketing era. Now that is something that is, at least to me, is associated with the customer relationship era. And look at what customer demands have grown. Now, they want it now, okay? Because what they want this interaction now. And then the customers expect personalized experiences. Probably a new concept for a lot of people, other than somebody walking into a retail store and expecting personalized attention. I don't shop online. My wife does, and I do. I get some things from Amazon occasionally, but by and large, I don't. But I really pay a lot of attention when I have to return goods and things of that nature, like I just had to this weekend. And what kind of customer service I get. Something was sent to me I didn't order. I returned it. I'll find out what to do. But I had very good relationship with both Amazon and one of their associate sellers. And then obviously the last thing here, which is very important, and I say important because I think sometimes we don't think simplicity or simpleness as being important. What that simply means is that the customer doesn't want to go through a lot of hoops to get things done. They want the transaction to be transparent, and they want it to be simple. They don't want to spend a lot of time fooling around because they feel like they have other things that they want to do. I'm not going to go through this slide because I think most of here is pretty self-explanatory. But let's look at the headline here, Service with a Smile. You want to keep your customers not only happy, you want to keep them engaged, and you want them to return. And you can't do that unless you have a smile. And by the way, and you probably, each of you probably knows far better than I, there's a way you can put a smile when you're dealing with people through the internet. And that has to come through. It has to be a pleasant experience. If the experience isn't pleasant, people aren't going to come back. And that's the same with retail. I mean, if you walk into a retail store and you have an unpleasant experience, you won't go back. And you probably tell your friends, I wouldn't go back and shop at Joe's car shop again because the service is terrible. We're going to pass on that. Nonprofit marketing is a little bit different. Obviously, they're not into the profit end. They're into a lot of other things that are aimed at improving the community or special interests or something of that nature. And so they do use things like public relations, which we're going to talk about more when we get to the promotions chapter. And they work on things of changing public opinion and attitudes and things of that nature. And last, yes, they need to increase the number of people either in the organization, active members, or those who will donate because that's their lifeblood. And so they need to have an increase, and that's kind of what they focus on. We are now going to talk about the 4 P's of marketing. And this is what the marketing manager done. And again, this concept is really brought home to you in the Energizer video. So the 4 P's are product, price, place, and promotion. This is a very difficult thing for any organization to do. We're going to talk about product development a little bit later on. But notice that you have to come up, you, Mr. or Miss Business, must come up with a product that people either want or need. If they don't want it or they don't need it, it's useless to bring into the marketplace because it's not going to work. Now, at least as far as I'm concerned, a classic example is the Edsel model that Ford brought out in the late 1950s. I know none of you are old enough to remember that. I am, and I could talk about it. Supposedly, or at least all the information I've had, is that the Edsel, by the way, was named after one of Henry Ford's sons. The Edsel was the most researched car as far as product development and also on so forth that Ford had ever done. Now, one of the things I never did drive an Edsel. I only knew one person who owned one. I mean, I saw some on the road, but I really only knew one person who owned one, and that may be one of my college professors. But one of the things with Edsel is they had a circle on the front grille, and it may be a little bit something different. The circle may have been like an oval or something of nature, but it was a round cut into the grill. And some comedian, I don't remember who it was, said, well, the reason that they did that was so that when 2 Edsels met each other, they could kiss. That caught on, and it was negative. And almost everything you heard about the Edsel from that point on was negative. And the car lasted on the market 2 years, maybe 3 at most. And yet, as I mentioned, Ford said it went through a lot of research and design to build that vehicle. It wasn't something that people wanted. Now, we can make a case as to whether or not you need an automobile. Some of us would say yes, some of us would say no. I mean, if you live in a city like New York or Chicago or Washington, D.C. that has good mass transit, you may not want a vehicle. Or if you have a vehicle, a private car, or if you have one, you may not, or you may only use it on the weekends because of the congestion in the city. But many other people who live different places say, a car is essential. And here we had either a want or a need. I prefer to look at it as a want. And people said, we don't want that. That thing doesn't meet what we want. So then, yes, and then they go through test marketing. And there are certain pockets within this country, I use that term, that companies go to because the demographics within those areas are what they need to test market their product or service. And then, of course, you have something known as the brand name. We'll get to branding a little bit later and explain it a little bit harder. But that is something that stands out. And people ask for product by brand. And they associate the product, the type of product, with the brand. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the next thing you need to do is you need to price your product. Here's 4 factors is what your competitors charge. Obviously, you have to look at production costs. Now, this assumes that you're in the manufacturing business and you're going to make something to sell. Because it's a little bit different for somebody who's a wholesaler or a retail outlet. That price that they do is not based upon production, but based on a number of other things. Then there's distribution comes into that, and then there's things called high price, low price strategies. And I want to mention here, this is a fallacy. This is a problem, high and low price. This is a problem that many small businesses run into. They come out with a product. They don't come out with a product. They come out with a product that's already on the market, but they've carved out a certain area they think they can be successful in. And so one of the things they do to make their way into the market is to set a low price because they feel that's the only way they can penetrate. Well, what happens after a certain period of time is they realize they can't make any money at that price. Now they're in a quandrum because it's difficult for any company to raise prices. If your competitors aren't going to raise prices, you're kind of sunk. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. A small business really has to think about price. It needs to differentiate itself in places other than price. Because if it intends to compete on price, it has to have a low enough price to make enough money. And that may never happen. Because, they may be in there fighting the big boys and the big girls. So, they have to do something. So you need to think about service. They need to think about agility. They need to think about delivery. Whatever sets them apart. But price, now this is just me talking here, price should be the last consideration. Unless they absolutely know that they can have a low price to get into the market and they can make money. Usually that will not happen. Middlemen, important and place strategies. We're going to talk about that when we get to distribution chapter 15. So I don't want to repeat something that we don't have to repeat. Then obviously we have to promote the product. We're going to talk about promotion in chapter 16 when we get there, but that's all kinds of things that you do. It's personal selling, it's public relations, it's advertisement, it's all sorts of things to make the public aware that you have this product on the market for sale. This slide just talks about perfect promotion. It says how to get customers to need your product. That's even when you have a want product as opposed to a need. Need, I'd like to think of things as like bread and butter and milk and eggs and things of that nature. So, you have to be somebody who's likable, somebody that is going to come back and do business with you, not only because of the products you're selling and maybe the place where you are, the type of service that you give, but because they have a good interaction with that salesperson, a relationship. This is just talking about web for promotions. I don't want to go into this, but again, the best thing to say here is if you're going to do this, you must have a site that is very easy to navigate. And so we'll have people wanting to return. Now we get into what I consider to be really really, really important piece, and each of us should consider that, and that is market research. You aren't going to get too much, too far down the line in selling if you don't understand your market. And the only way you understand your market is by researching what you have there. So you need to find out the kind of people that you have, what kind of incomes they have, other demographics, etc. And research, as the last bullet said, if it's done properly and the right questions are asked, can give you some idea of trends. What people are going to do maybe next month or 2 months from now or 6 months or a year from now. And that helps you do a better job of understanding the market. Now, these are the steps in the research process. You want to define and I want to take this away from problem, define the opportunity. And because there may not be a problem. It may simply be an opportunity to move in. Now, you could say, and take away the word problem, what is absent in this market? What is it that people are looking for that they don't have? Collect the research data, then you have to analyze the data. You have to make sense out of the data. And then you have to choose the best solution to implement what it is. Now, I talked about this before, but I'll mention it again. We have to be careful that we define the opportunity, and we're not defining something that is not the opportunity. Very important to make sure we're homing in on that. So where are we today? What alternatives are there? What type of information do I need to collect? And by the way, you have to be careful about that so you're not limiting yourself. And then who gathers the information? How do I get it? Where do I get it? Those are all important things. Okay, let's move on here a little bit more about the research. The easiest data to gather is data which is known as secondary information. This is available to you many times without cost. You can get information from the Department of Motor Vehicles. You can get information from your local library. You can get it from other places that are available. and as I say, it's easy to collect this data. One reason it's easy to collect is because somebody else has already collected it. Maybe an agency's collected it for a particular reason. And some of the information you want is there. Maybe broken down by age, maybe by residence or residential area, and certain other things. But it's secondary data, and the emphasis here is that it's been gathered by someone else, not by you. Primary data, on the other hand, is something that you or your marketers or your marketing research team gather by doing a number of things, by conducting surveys, online surveys or telephone surveys or surveys by mail or interviews that would be one-on-one or focus groups. Focus group, a little bit different than one-on-one. Focus group, you have a number of people and there's a person in the center, usually in the center, asking questions for clarification, etc. That is gathering primary data. Now, what I want to tell you about a focus group is, and it's very, very simple thing here for you to remember, and that is if you intend to gather data by a focus group, a number of people together and one person answering questions, you have to have a person who knows how to gather this type of information. What I mean by that is that most of the time, the person who is running the focus group, who's the moderator of the focus group, asks what are known as open-ended questions. And once the person or persons answer the question, then this person who's the moderator is trained how to elicit more information from that answer. And most of us are not trained that way. So you want to make sure that you have somebody who really understands what a focus group is and how to get the most out of a focus group. By the way, when I say that, please don't say I'm demeaning focus groups. They're very, very important. It's just you want to have the right person moderating a focus group. So now you've gathered this data and you have to turn it into useful information. And once you've done that, you're going to, well, you have to analyze it. Then you're going to, plan your strategy, make recommendations, and then finally, like any decision, you're going to have to evaluate what you've done and possibly follow up. Here are some benefits of marketing research. You get to find out not only customers' needs, but if they're satisfied. You get to find out if your marketing strategies work. You can find out why you didn't achieve your goal. All of those things are there. Remember, when you go into this process, it has to be objective. Now, this is environmental scanning. Actually, you do some of this in research, but this is scanning. And research is in-depth. Scanning is not. Like you scan a newspaper article and you get enough information out of it, or online articles. Yeah, well, wait a minute, I need to go back and read this more thoroughly. So this is what you get. You get things that are going to impact you, and then you can home in on it. Now we're going to pass this about China. Now this is the marketing environment. And you can see this, what we have here on the slide, graphically displayed in your text, figure 13.5 at the top of page 373. You see the customers in the center, the 4 Ps around it, and then these different areas within the environment: socio-cultural, competitive, economic, global, and technological. I'm not going to go over each of those because you can read those for yourselves and you can see that and understand. It's all understandable. There's nothing magic here. What this is telling us is this is the environment, and we need to understand it. We marketers need to understand that environment and those phases, if you will, of the environment if we intend to be successful. ABCs of marketing. Really pretty easy here to understand. We're actually going beyond A. We're going all the way to C. We're actually going all the way to G. But all this talks about things that we're supposed to do. We need to be customer focused. We need to compare ourselves against the top competitors in our field, known as benchmarking. We need to continue to improve. We have to have the best value for the dollar the person is going to spend. We're back to empowerment. We want employees to take responsibility and give them authority. Again, we're back into relationship building. And then once we're trying to attain our goal, and that's where we want to be. There are only 2 markets. And it's either the customer market, consumer market actually is the term I use, but customers fine. Consumer's better, and I'll explain why in a second. And then we have the B2B, because both of these are customers. The consumer market, however, is something that goes to the end user. For the most part, 99.9% of the time, what we buy as consumers is not used again. It's not used to make another product, not used for resale or anything else. Now, I said 99.9% of the time, maybe a little lower than that. Probably it's not any higher, but it comes to the end user, we being the end user. Business to business, however, is much different, and we talked about this a little before, and we'll talk about it more. It could go to the business, and the business is going to use it to do something in its business, or it could use it to make a new product, or it could sell it to somebody else. So they have all those options. The consumer market really doesn't have those options. As I said, most of the time. Yes, we do find it occasionally, but for the most time, no. Consumer market is a lot larger than the business-to-business market because there are more of us. And marketers are going to decide which they want to do that. And they'll do which market they want to serve. They'll do it by market segmentation, or they'll do it by target marketing, among other things. And here, notice market segmentation is dividing the market and then making sure that you're getting the people that you want that have the characteristics that you want to sell to. And target marketing is actually saying, okay, this particular market is going to give us the biggest return for our effort. We want to concentrate on that market. Here's the way you segment the market. You can do it by geography. That's pretty simple. Territory, states, cities, etc. Demographics, that's breaking it down by age, by income, education, some other type of variable. And psychographic is dividing it into values, attitudes, etc. Then you have a benefit segmentation and a volume or usage segmentation. Here, benefit is benefits of the product you're trying to sell or service you're trying to sell. And then the other is dividing the market by volume, by how much you're selling. Now this is segmenting the consumer market. We can see this, and it's listed in your text in figure 13.6 at the bottom of page 376. And we're not going to go into this because, again, this is something that's pretty self-explanatory. You can look at it, you can see it, and you can understand it just as easy as, or perhaps easier than me talking about it. Niche marketing. This is carving out a small area that is profitable and homing all your efforts into this area because it's going to return what you're looking for. And you're able to get in there and you're able to do it better than your competitors, and maybe you can keep your competitors out by what you're doing. One-on-one marketing is exactly what it says. You're developing a product, a good, or a service for an individual. Yes, we have mass marketing. Here we're trying to get please the largest number of people possible. And of course, relationship marketing is just the reverse of mass marketing. And we've really talked about relationship marketing quite a bit, so we don't have to spend a great deal more time talking about that. This is what a consumer goes through when he or she decides to buy something. Recognize the issue they have or problem, search for information. Now remember, searching for information could be you're in the store and you're looking at counters and you're comparing prices and et cetera, et cetera. And when you're doing that, that is getting into looking at the alternatives. You make a decision to buy, and then you go back and you reevaluate that and say, you know, did I do the right thing? This is just talking about online reviews, making sure that we get what we need and make sure that the reviews we're getting are valid. Some people post things that they like to, they really aren't as good as they ought to be. And these are key factors in the consumer decision-making process, if you will. You have to learn, you have reference groups, you have culture, you have subcultures, and things of that nature. And people do We don't stop and think about this, but we do go through these things when we think about what it is that we're going to buy. Now we can have challenges every place. This is both in the consumer market and in the business to business market. Again, we don't want to talk too much about this because these are not that these don't rise to the level of importance, but not as important to discuss as other things are. And these are the folks we find in the business to business market. There are people who are manufacturers or wholesalers and retailers. We'll see more about them when we get to chapter 15. Institutions like hospitals and schools, and then of course the government. Notice here at the bottom, we've already talked about this. These goods can be sold and resold over a period of time. It can be used to manufacture other products. So it's a different market. And then this slide gives us the differences between these two types of markets, business to business and consumer. And we can see this graphically displayed, figure 13.7 at the top of page 381. Again, this is not something we need to go into with great depth, but it is something I suggest that you look at, only because you may be reading this and get an aha moment. Aha meaning I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. And it's not information that I believe is critical to understanding helping buyers buy, but it differentiates between what I would do as a consumer, you would do as a consumer, and what you would do if you were a purchasing person or a buyer for a company, business to business market. They look at things differently. And again, remember, consumer market, we're talking about end user, and in the business to business market, it's a whole different ballgame. I think the one thing I would point out to you is that before we take a break here, is in the middle section that's colored on the left side with purple. The last item in there, last bullet mentioned in there, is buyers in the business to business market are trained. Most of us in the consumer market aren't trained to make buying decisions. We do make them. And we may make them with a lot of information based upon rational and sound judgment. But we've not been trained. We've not gone to school for that. We've not gone to a purchasing institute or something of that nature to understand the parameters of purchasing as those folks do. We don't think of it as purchasing. We think of it as buying. Whereas I would tell you the business to business market thinks of it as purchasing. Similar terms, a little bit different. We're at 4:58. We finished with chapter 13. Let's take a break and come back at 5 o'clock and we'll get into chapter 14. Thank you. Please come back at 5 o'clock. All right, 5 o'clock, we're back. We're going to talk now about Chapter 14, Developing and Pricing Goods and Services. Now let's look at the learning objectives for this chapter. We're going to describe the total product offer, identify the various kinds of consumer and industrial goods, summarize the functions of packaging, and then contrast brand name, and trademark, and show the value of brand equity. Explain the steps in new product development process, look at the product life cycle, and then identify various pricing objectives and strategies. Okay. This is something that every company selling a product must do. Value. Notice that the American Marketing Association says that is the value, that is the foundation of marketing. Value. And value is considered to be, according to this definition, good quality at a fair price. Now, some will tell you that good is not a really the best word to use here. You would use some other type of word like great or outstanding or excellent. The good is not definitive enough. Regardless, you want to put out a product that people want because it meets their needs, or as we've talked about before, exceeds their needs, and it is offered to them at a fair price. This is a list of products that customers or consumers won't give up. I'm not going to go through that, but I think it's interesting to look at. Now, this is a term called distributed product development. Notice what it says here. You're handing off some of your innovation to other organizations, and some of it would be outside the United States. Here we have a picture of a McDonald's in Germany. And notice that here we have differences because, as I like to mention, we'll talk about this a little bit later in great detail. You can go into a McDonald's in Germany and get a beer. And I'm not saying you want to drink a beer, but you could buy a beer if you wanted one. That doesn't happen in the United States. Now, that's not to say it may not happen, but right now it doesn't happen. So what this means is not only are we outsourcing, but you're adapting to different cultures. You have to, pardon me, beer is the national drink in Germany. And so if you're going to go into that type of a business, a food business, you have to be able to offer beer. Now, a total product is something, and notice what it says here. It's everything that the consumer evaluates when he or she is going to make a decision about buying your particular product. And so what marketers have to do, and this goes back to the research part, you have to find out what it is that, I'm going to use the term here, that turns on a consumer to buy your product. Now, we're talking here, at least to me, about things that are outside convenience goods. We'll talk about convenience goods shortly. They're into something where we're going to make a decision based upon quality, based upon price, maybe based upon availability, maybe based upon exclusivity. So we're going to take all those things into consideration. We don't take those things into consideration when we go into a supermarket to buy a gallon of milk. Now, it is possible when we buy a gallon of milk, if we have sampled product A versus product B, and we found the taste more palatable, even though the price is the same, but the price for product A may be a little bit higher, we're probably going to buy product A. But normally speaking, a gallon of milk is a gallon of milk, and we're not going to make any decision. Now, we may go to some store that has the milk on sale, or routinely has it for a lesser price than somebody else does. But we're not judging quality here. We're judging price. So we're not judging everything that goes into the product. And I want you to see that distinction, at least, and I hope I made it well enough, that there is a distinction. Okay. This is just giving product innovations, and not something I really want to spend a lot of time on. Now, this particular slide is something we need to pay attention to. And this is found in your text on page 14.1, components of a total product offer. And we can look at some things. Reputation of the product. What's been my experience with the product? How quickly can I get it? Does it have a good image? Is there a guarantee? Does the store, that sells this, is it set up the way I like for it? Does it convey something of, yeah, you need to purchase this thing? And then we think about price and brand name and packaging, convenience, and all sorts of other things. Now, there's another thing here we have to think about. We think about product line, and we think of product mix. Product line is a similar product line is a variety of products that are very similar because the characteristics are almost the same. And this listing here for Coca-Cola gives us an idea. They talk about Coke, Diet Coke, Cherry Coke, Zero Coke, etc. We're all talking here about soft drinks, or in some parts of the country we refer to them as soda. So we're thinking about those along the same line. There are really no major differences here. Yeah, it might be a little bit different taste. It might be a little bit less sugar. Might be a little bit more carbonation, but it's essentially the same type of product. Now, that is different than a product mix. And this is what, in the example we have here, Procter & Gamble, a large consumer product giant company, a Fortune 500 company headquartered here in Cincinnati. And the product mix notes, we have things like toothpaste and cosmetics, although they've gotten rid of a lot of their cosmetic lines. I don't know if they have any left at all. Diapers, batteries, and things of that nature. I think batteries are on the way out too. This list was put together before Procter & Gamble started divesting itself of certain things. But bar soap is still in there. Shampoo is still in there. And other personal hygiene products like deodorant and things of that nature. That's a product mix. Now, we could say that Coca-Cola would fall into that product mix because it sells or it owns Minute Maid orange juice, and it also sells bottled water and a few other things. So if all of those were sold under the Coca-Cola label, or all within Coca-Cola, even if they had different names on them, if it's orange juice, etc., then we could say that was a product mix as well. Product differentiation is something that marketers do and manufacturers do to say, yeah, I know that I'm selling detergent, but mine's different than yours is. And we do this by a variety of ways. We could do it with pricing, with packaging, advertising, etc. Now, let's use the first example, bottled water. I submit to you that bottled water is bottled water is bottled water. And to give you the perfect example of that is some years ago, Pepsi-Cola got in trouble because it said it was PWC, PWS. And PWS stood for Public Water Source. So what that meant was Pepsi-Cola was essentially going to the local tap, turning on the tap and putting water in a bottle and saying it was bottled water to compete with Evian and whoever else sells bottled water. Now, if you say it's spring water, if you say it's well water, if you say it's some other kind of water, you can say, all right, I've differentiated myself. But let's get the cases. Water is water. Aspirin is aspirin. The largest selling aspirin in the world is made by Bayer. Now, when I was a kid, we used St. Joseph aspirin. Don't ask me why. I couldn't tell you. My mother bought it. I don't know why. And I don't know if you can still buy St. Joseph aspirin. I suppose you can. But you could go to Kroger or you could go to some other supermarket that sells aspirin under their own brand name, and it's no different. You can go to Kroger and buy their brand of quote-unquote Tylenol, whatever they call it, and it's the same, essentially the same as Tylenol. So what we're doing here is we're differentiating our product based on something: packaging, price, convenience, whatever it happens to be. The same way laundry detergents, the same. So now we have 4 categories of consumer goods and services. You can see these enumerated on page 395: convenience goods, shopping goods and services, specialty goods and services, and then unsought goods and services. Convenient goods and services are things that we make purchases for and we don't think a lot about. I used the example of milk before, bread, eggs. They have gasoline on here, but I wouldn't do that because some people insist upon buying Shell or BP or Exxon or Mobil. Of course, Exxon and Mobil are together today, or Sunoco or something else. Some people will go to a cut rate gasoline station, what I call cut rate, not set up with a petroleum manufacturer, and like a supermarket that sells gasoline, like Kroger does. There's other ones that do as well. So I don't consider gasoline in the same category, but you could put it in that category if you want. So we're going to buy these things, but we're not going to make a lot of thought about how we've decided to buy them. Shopping goods and services are things that people buy, but only after comparison. A comparison of some kind of value here. And things that fall into that category are appliances and clothes, shoes, things of that nature. I mentioned home remodeling. I give you an example that my wife and I, through our married years, we've owned several different houses, and we've had to put new roofs on. And we routinely get at least 2 estimates. And then we try to find out something about the people who are going to do this work for us, so we have some kind of an idea before we make a decision. In the next category, excuse me, I have to move the slide here a second. The next category we're going to come to are specialty goods and services. Notice that these have unique characteristics and a distinctive brand identity, like a Rolex watch or perhaps a Rolls-Royce. Mentions down here at the bottom Ritz-Carlton hotels, very high-end hotels. And we're going to go through a good bit of decision making before we do some kind of purchase here. I'm not going to go into the slide as one of those that the information's fine, but it's really not germane here. And the last thing we talk about here are classification of unsought goods and services. This is contracting with a funeral director. It's buying insurance. It is calling a tow truck because our car broke down, or I need to have a flat tire changed and I don't have a spare. So we don't even think about this. This isn't even on our radar screen. Well, we're not going to go through that, and we're not going to go through that, but we will go here. Now, we move to a new category, industrial goods and services. And this, first of all, we're going to talk about industrial goods here. And here we're talking about installations, capital items for a manufacturer, piece of equipment that they need to manufacture other goods and services, accessory equipment, supplies, etc. And a lot of that, the supplies will help them make other product, maybe supplies for the business, etc. Now, this particular slide, and you can see this in your text, figure 14.2 at the top of page 397. These are different categories of industrial goods and services. And notice we have here consumer goods on the left. I don't know how well you can see it. You can see it very well in the textbook. And then we have industrial goods over here on the right, and how they interact, etc. And it goes back to some of what we just talked about before. Notice the supplies, things like paper clips and stationery and things of that nature. And then accessory equipment, tools, office machinery, et cetera, et cetera. So give us some kind of idea. And they are, and I want you to remember, the two categories are different. They don't blend over. Two categories being consumer and industrial. They do not blend over. Now, we come into at least to me, a very interesting area, topic that we really don't think about, and that is packaging. We use packaging and we think of packaging as just, oh, it's there, and we don't pay attention to it. But packaging actually, in some respects, attracts us. And we want something to look pleasant, and obviously the manufacturer is trying to catch our eye and get us to make a purchase decision based upon what we see, not necessarily what we've gone through to find out, although the package will help us make that decision. How? Why? Well, let's look at what the functions of packaging are. And the first was what I've already mentioned. Catch our eye, get our attention, get us to pay attention to this particular product. It's meant to protect. It's meant to be easy to open, although many of us would say that's not true. It's going to give us some information about the product, price, so much per ounce, et cetera, et cetera. Give us some idea of the product's benefits. Why is it beneficial to us? If we think about food, it'll give us calorie count and what's in there, et cetera. Give us some kind of an idea if the product has a warranty, and will give us some kind of an idea, a warning. Be careful, don't use the product to do this or do that or something else. And then some kind of an idea of the value. And perhaps not only the value, but the uses. Bundling is something a little bit different than branding. Bundling is putting two separate entities, if you will, and the products or services they offer under one umbrella. They give us here the idea of what Virgin Airlines does with door-to-door service. But I would give you a bundling in a way that many of us will be familiar with. Going into a service station to buy gasoline and being able to walk immediately to the right or to the left and find a fast food outlet like Subway or Taco Bell or something of that nature where we can purchase food. And then, of course, many of them now, service stations have their own food, or Speedway does, and there are other ones that do. So that is getting you into a business to buy a specific product, gasoline in this case. But while you're there, you can buy other products. Now, the next we come to is branding. And this is much different than bundling, as I mentioned before. By the way, you have a good section on branding here in the text, page 398 and 399. Notice a brand is a name, symbol, or design that identifies goods and products or services, and in some cases distinguishes itself from competitors. Now, why do I say in some cases? Well, even though they don't want this, people ask for a Kleenex when they actually are asking for a facial tissue. Kleenex is a brand name owned by Kimberly-Clark. People will occasionally say Scotch tape. Scotch tape is a brand of cellophane tape, cellophane sticky tape. Scotch tape is a brand owned by a trademark even that is owned by 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. Many years ago, not as much today, people would ask for a Coke when they meant any kind of soft drink, usually a cola type soft drink. Many companies don't like that, although they still, there's much they can do about it when the consumer asks for that. But that's the object of a brand. A trademark is more specific in that it is a brand that has exclusive rights to use a particular name. And notice it has legal protection. So Scotch tape has legal protection for Scotch brand tape. Same way with Kleenex, legal protection for that particular type of facial tissue. So those are things that they're protected. Nobody else could use that. And I'll give you an example of trademark. Many of you know of Victoria's Secret, company that makes women's lingerie. Now there was a company here in Louisville, which is about 100 miles here from Cincinnati, down the Ohio River, and they sold women's lingerie under the name of Victor's Little Secret. Victoria's Secret went to court and sued, said it was trademark infringement, and Victoria's Secret was vindicated. And Victor's Little Secret, I don't know if it's still in business, they had to change their name. All right, we're going to move on here. We have some brand name categories, the manufacturer's brands. And again, here, what they say here, brand names of manufacturers distributing products nationally. Dealer or private label brands, these are essentially the same brand, same as the manufacturer's brand, except they're sold under the dealer's private label, and usually for a little bit less money. Generic brands, these are non-branded products sold at a discount. And the knockoff brands are illegal copies. So if you go to Times Square in New York and somebody is selling you a Rolex watch for 50 bucks, you know that that is a knockoff brand and what they're doing is illegal. Now this just gives you a little thing about the most valuable brands in the United States. We're not going to spend any any time on this, but it's something that is interesting. Brand awareness is something that companies try to do. They try to build that because this, you want people to have good recall and recognition of the brand. It also is part where consumer won't take any substitute for this. That is brand preference. And then brand is, brand preference is I prefer this brand over that brand. Brand insistence is I won't take anything but that brand. Now, this is what companies struggle to do. And I say struggle because many of the new products that are developed by companies don't see the light of day. And so we have to go through a screening process, and companies go through that so they can decide what products they want to bring to market. And this is the step, or the steps that they go through. And you can see this in the figure 14.3 in your text at the bottom of page 402. Obviously, first of all, there's an idea. And then the product is developed and screened, if you will, to some extent, to determine whether or not it's a viable product. And we want to make sure that we're not concentrating on too many products and only on the products that have the potential, or at least we believe the potential to be successful. And then we go through analysis. We need to find out how much it's going to cost us to produce it, what cost of raw materials is, what the production costs are going to be, how many employees we're going to need, and things of that nature. Next, we actually develop something. We actually build a prototype or prototypes, depending upon the amount of money that's involved here. And then we take the prototypes and test them. We'll do that concept test. It's called concept testing, if you will. And we'll do that in a particular type of market. I mentioned there's a number of markets throughout the United States. Older edition of this text used to show that different markets throughout the United States. Really not something we have to worry about, but it was interesting because you would think they would go to big cities, and yet they don't go to big cities. They don't go to small cities, but they don't go to big cities. So we're gonna test that, and then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to bring the product to fruition. In other words, we're going to make the product and we're going to sell it and make it available to the public. So that's the process that we go through. And I said it's very difficult because many products never see the light of day. They don't get past the screening stage. They don't get past the analysis stage. Then sometimes you see a product to be on a market, and the next thing you know, it's gone. You don't find it again for whatever it didn't do well, and they're not going to keep a product in the market if it's not going to return a profit. It's as simple as that. And this is some kind of an idea about how to bring product to market, build up slowly, design for single function, package it perfectly. I don't know if there's a way to do that. And then obviously become a status symbol, which is not the easiest thing to do. Here's the last couple things that we talked about before I mentioned, but this gives you a little bit more than what I was on concept testing. Obviously, you go out here, maybe focus groups, et cetera, to find out whether or not people are going to, sign on for this. They really like the thing. And then commercialization, obviously, again, bringing it out for sale to the general public. Let's pass that. Now, this is a very, very, very interesting thing. These are the 4 stages of the product life cycle. And you can see the product life cycle graphically displayed in your text figure 14.4 at the top of page 405 with introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Again, this is the graphic display that you can see in your text. And notice here they're using something at the introduction right now is all electric cars. Now, I would tell you that all electric cars today have moved a little bit beyond the introduction area. So if you say they're there, I would say they're a little bit closer to the line with hybrid cars. Hybrid cars are supposedly in a growth area, but I would challenge that, because as long as gasoline prices are low, and they are, hybrid cars aren't going to sell a lot. My wife and I have a hybrid car. It's the second one we bought. The car that I drive over here to the office every day, it's not a hybrid, only because I didn't want to buy a hybrid. I didn't think it was going to be cost effective for me to do that, and I didn't. I did buy a car that gets me good gasoline mileage. And it gets some other things here. They show smartphones, they're in a maturity area, and then video cassette recorders are in decline. Now, I want to tell you that every product that we can think of does go through this, but some products are so successful, they're still in this, what you would consider this maturity stage. And the one that I can give you that, and I think without fear of contradiction, is Tide detergent. The last I knew, and I say this without contradiction, Tide is still the #1 detergent seller in the United States. Tide has been #1 for many, many, many years. Now, Procter & Gamble brings out new and improved Tide, or excellent Tide, or whatever. I'm not trying to be smart. I'm trying to find a good adjective for it. But it has been in that area for a long period of time. So even though this is the product life cycle, many products will be in this maturity stage, and they will stay there for many years. But the only way they stay there is for the manufacturer to continue to improve them, or to convince people that they've been improved. Now, I'm not saying it's chicanery, but they're doing something to say that they've improved them. And this gives you another idea, and it says a little bit more about the product life cycle. You can see this figure 14.5 on page 406. And notice here that going in, it can use a high price here because they're innovators and they don't have a lot of competitors. Now, here's the product life cycle, and what you see, the next right down from that is figure 14.6, right beneath that, and it talks about life cycle stages, sales, profits, and competitors. And notice here in the growth stage, this is rapid sales, high profits, and you have a growing number of competitors. Where in a maturity stage, notice it talks about declining profits. And I tell you, that doesn't always follow through, especially with the Tide example that I used. But you have a stable number of competitors, and you may have competitors that drop out simply because they don't want to stay there. It's not cost effective for them to stay at that area. Now, why do we have different pricing objectives? Well, there's a number of reasons. Obviously, the first reason is to make a profit. But another reason, and maybe just as important reason, is to generate traffic. You have to have people wanting to buy the product. Otherwise, you don't need to have it for sale. Greater market share, you want to create an image. Different pricing strategies, target costing. This is an interesting strategy because it meets the firm's targeted profit. Competitive pricing, you're pricing your product based upon some algorithm, if you will, of what your competitors are. Break-even analysis. Probably you're not going to do that too often, because if you're only breaking even, you're not going to make money. If you don't make money, you're not going to stay in business very long. Total fixed cost, obviously everything remains the same no matter how much is produced or sold. It's fixed. Variable cost is going to change depending upon how much you're producing. I'm not going to go into break even because I really don't. I don't think that's a good price strategy. Skimming price. This is the new product. We saw this back in introduction in the life cycle. You're gonna charge as much as you can because you don't have any competition. Penetration prices. That's what I talked about early on about small companies having an issue of saying they have to have a low price so they can penetrate the market. That can be a good tactic, but it's costly to small businesses because if they don't make enough profit, they're going to have to raise prices, and that's always difficult. Everyday low prices. That says I'm going to say this is the price I'm going to charge, and I'm not going to offer any sales or anything of that nature. High and low pricing is exactly what it says. This is different from ELDP because it's higher except during the special sales. And then psychological pricing is pricing a product at some point that's going to attract people because they think it doesn't cost as much as it really does. And a favorite story of mine years ago, somebody said that they were going to buy 3 cans of tomatoes for 33 cents a piece. And somebody said, no, you don't have to do that. You got to go down to XYZ store because they have them on sale 3 for $1. And the person put the tomatoes down and went down to the other store and paid a penny more plus tax if there was any tax. That brings us to the end of chapter 14, 537. We'll take a short break and come back and discuss chapter 15. And we will not have enough time tonight to do chapter 16. So we'll do chapter 16 next week. So please come back 5:39. We will discuss chapter 15. All right, 539, we're back. This is chapter 15, distributing products. We're going to explain the concept of marketing channels and their value, demonstrate how intermediaries perform the 6 marketing utilities, identify the types of wholesale intermediaries in the distribution system, compare the distribution strategies of retailers, explain the various kinds of non-store retailing, explain the various ways to build cooperation and channel systems, excuse me, and then describe logistics and outline how intermediaries manage the transportation and storage of goods. Because time is of the essence, I want to give the lecture discussion question for this coming week. And the lecture discussion question is, compare and contrast the differences between the production and selling marketing errors with the customer relationship error. So the question is compare and contrast the difference between, or the differences between the production and selling error, marketing errors with that of the customer relationship error. Marketing intermediaries. These are organizations that assist in moving goods and services between manufacturers to the business-to-business market and from manufacturers to the consumer market, or business-to-consumer market. Now, I changed the term here, business to manufacturer, so I wasn't using business too often, but essentially that's what we're talking about here. A channel of distribution is, notice here what the slide says, a group of marketing intermediaries that join together to transport goods and services from producer or manufacturer to the consumer. We're going to move here to what I consider to be an interesting slide in just a second. So there are different types of marketing intermediaries. We have agents and brokers, we have wholesalers, and then we have the retailer. Agents and brokers bring the buyer and seller together, and they will assist in doing such things as negotiating the price, et cetera, but they don't take title to the goods. In other words, they don't have goods here. I don't own the goods. I don't have them. They're someplace else. We're going to get them to you. A wholesaler, on the other hand, does take possession of the goods, and then that intermediary sells to a host of different types of people. Retailers, manufacturers, sometimes government or governments, hospitals, schools, and things of that nature. And then a retailer, people that we know as Nordstrom or Macy's or IKEA or someone like that, some store like that, sells to the end user, the consumer. Intermediaries are necessary. Many people think they're not. They perform tasks faster and usually less expensive than most manufacturers could. They make the markets more efficient by providing the goods where people want them, and where they can buy them, and where they can do the transactions as quickly as possible. Now, two slides for you here we're going to look at. They're rather busy slides, and you may most likely will get better understanding about them if you look at figure 15.1 on page 420, figure 15.2 on page 421. And this gives us an idea of what would happen if everybody went to a manufacturer to buy something. Mostly here on, if you look at figure 15.2. So I'm not going to talk about that one as much, 15.1, because I'm going to talk about this one, 15.2. See how many different transactions would have to be here if people insisted upon going to the manufacturer, as opposed to the manufacturer selling to a wholesaler who's right here in the middle, and that wholesaler can do those different transactions. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind, and we're going to talk about this again a little bit later. The question is going to come to your mind, yeah, but the wholesaler adds to the price. No question about it. But what do you think would happen if everybody and their brother and sister who wanted to buy a new box of Kellogg's cereal had to get in their car and drive to Battle Creek, Michigan? How quickly would you be served? Not very quickly. Now, this slide talks about it right here. Can we eliminate marketing intermediaries? Yeah, we can't eliminate their activities. Again, they perform functions quicker and less expensively than the manufacturer would. Yes, they add cost, but those are offset. Again, notice here it says by the value added. Value added is convenience, among other things, etc. This slide just talks about distribution's effect on the food dollar. I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to that. Now, this is what the intermediaries perform for you. And there are 6 functions that they perform. And unfortunately, we don't see the 6th one. You can see it in your text. Form, time, place, possession, information, and service. We'll look at a little bit of this. Farm changes raw material to useful products. And so here, this is form is Starbucks. Although I think Starbucks really, we ought to think about it as an intermediary, except Starbucks is making coffee from the coffee bean. Dell is or is not an intermediary, but see the functions that they perform here. Time utility is having something not only where you want it, but when you want it. This is the advent of 24-hour day stores, etc. Place, where you want it. Possession, you can do this. They use thing here about McDonald's, and you can use your credit card now, etc. So that gives you some kind of idea of other additional convenience, something you could not do if you were dealing with the manufacturer. Information is exactly what it says, and then service. Service is provided before, during, and after the sale. And this is what intermediaries do, especially wholesalers. And it's something we don't think about, but it's something that's done on an everyday basis, almost on an every transaction basis. Now, here are the wholesale intermediaries. They make business-to-business sales for the most part. However, you do have organizations like, as the slide says, Staples and Costco, which have a retail part to them. So you have the best of both worlds there. Remember, retail goes to the end user. Wholesale normally goes to another business or an institution or a government entity. And most of us know more about retailers than we do about wholesalers, because we don't normally deal with wholesalers. We deal with retailers. Now, there are 2 types of wholesalers. But first of all, we have to remember that a wholesaler is an independent business. It may have a relationship with the manufacturer, but it is not owned by the manufacturer. So you have full service and limited service. Full service runs the entire gamut, all the distribution functions, sales, service, etc., transportation in some cases. Limited, only going to do certain things within the distribution service. And here's some of the limited ones that we know of. We may not know the names, but we know it. Rack jobbers, cash and carry, and drop shippers. Rack jobbers, they put racks in retail stores. And they're sold on consignment. When something is sold, they get the sale. They get the money. Cash and carry wholesaler is exactly what it says. You come in, you get the merchandise you want, you carry it out, you pay cash. Notice also that there is a limited amount of product available, or products available. And then drop shippers, they're going to take order from a retailer or perhaps a wholesaler, and then the merchandise is going to be shipped directly to the user or buyer, as the case is here. Now, here's the difference between agents and brokers. They're very similar. An agent normally has a long-time relationship with his or her clients. May represent more than one manufacturer, and usually in a specific geographic area. A broker usually represents client on a temporary basis. They perform essentially the same functions, and remember, they bring buyer and seller together, but they do not take possession of the goods. Retailing, and I want to preface this slide about retailing by telling you something that you already know. I just want to make this point. The face of retailing in the United States is changing as we speak. The internet is having a huge, huge impact on big box stores, and we cannot expect that to change. We may find that some of the big box stores are nimble enough to get into the online business and say what they do. But as you may have heard, Macy's is closing about 100 stores. There's another large retailer, I've forgotten who, is closing a number of stores. I expect this is going to continue. Amazon has had a lot to do with that. And by the way, I'm not denigrating Amazon, just a statement of fact. And we need to know that when this changes our employment picture. Notice there's 5 million people employed in retail. But as we see big box stores closing, it means those people are out. They're going to have to look for other jobs. Maybe their entire career has been spent in retail, and there may not be other places for them to go. And this just talks about social media, but not so much social media. I want to talk about is the internet. I'm not going to spend too much time on social media or quick growing areas in retail. These are the type of retail stores that we have. By the way, when we talked about the full service retailer, I did not mention to you because the slide did not come up comparison with. There is a figure 15.4 on page 425 in your text. Gives you some kind of an idea of what a full service wholesaler does. These are the types of retail stores that give you department store, discount, supermarket, warehouse, category killer, etc. And as I say, we're going to see that changing as we go along. There's different types of retail distribution strategies: intensive, selective, and exclusive. Intensive is exactly what it says. They're going to put as many of those products that it makes in as many stores as possible so it saturates the market. Selective distribution is just the reverse of intensive. Only going to be a preferred group of stores and only maybe in certain areas, etc. So you're not going to find this product everywhere. And exclusive pulls that back even further, and you're only going to find the product in one store and maybe only in one part of town or one town in the state or something of that nature. These are forms of non-store retailing: electronic and telemarketing. Electronic is simply online. We can't change that. Telemarketing is selling via the telephone, exactly what it says. And we have things like vending machines, where at the place where you work or on the corner, or even in supermarkets or in department stores. And then we have social commerce. Notice this promotes social interaction, assists in online buying, et cetera, et cetera. Other forms of non-store retailing: direct selling. This is where people come into your homes and sell products. Tupperware parties and things of that nature. Direct marketing. This is linking the manufacturer and the intermediary. It says or, but I'm going to use the word and, with the ultimate customer. Four types of, or four systems of channel relationships. Corporate distribution, we'll give examples of each one of these. Contractual distribution, administered distribution, and then supply chains. Excuse me. Corporate distribution is where the corporation or the manufacturer owns everything, does the manufacturing, and owns the outlets where the person or persons go in and make a retail purchase. And the examples they give you here are Goodyear Tire and Sherwin-Williams Paint. Contract distribution is something different. Here are members, and mostly we talk here about franchises in a way, or types of franchises. People in these relationships, these contractual distribution systems, are required to cooperate through the provisions of the contract. So you have franchises, and they talk about here McDonald's and Baskin Robbins, etc. Then wholesale sponsored chains like IGA and Ace Hardware, and then retail cooperatives like Associated Grocers, I'm not familiar with, but True Value Hardware I am familiar with. So notice you have two different types of hardware. Ace, which is wholesale sponsored, and then True Value, which is a retail cooperative. Remember, cooperatives are owned by the members. An administered distribution system, where here is the manufacturer, or as the slide says, the producer, manages all parts of the marketing function. Kraft Foods, Ralph Lauren. And then supply chains. Excuse me, I mispronounced it again. Supply chains. All of the activities, the various organizations are linked together, and they agree to move goods and services from the source, raw material, to the product, the production part, and eventually to the consumer. This has become a big deal today, and so we have a specialized area of training, if you will, or management called supply chain management. And by the way, there are some colleges and universities that offer degrees in supply chain management. It's managing everything, all the movement, raw materials, parts, and works in progress, et cetera, through the entire supply chains. And this is managing everything that goes through there. So this is the management of the supply chain. One is taking care of the other. It's very important, and it's something that we see quite frequently. Now, this gives us a graphic picture of supply chains, and we can see this. We see two things here. We see, number one is the channel of distribution, and we've talked about channels of distribution before. And then we see the supply chain. So the supply chain, by the way, is figure 15.7 in your text. The supply chain would be everything from the supplier's plants all the way to the consumer. Whereas a channel of distribution goes from the manufacturer to the consumer. So actually what you're doing is you're adding another step, another place in this distribution. Difference between supply chain, because that's everything that's in the line to get the good or service from start to finish, or actually before start to finish. Suppliers' plants would be bringing in the raw material all the way to the consumer. Obviously, we have problems, and it says weak links can break the chain. That's something we have to be concerned about. Natural disasters. One of the things big concerning about supply chains today is the change in weather patterns. It's a big issue. As weather patterns change, we find that we're getting more storms. We're getting severer storms. We're getting more hot weather, more drought conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So people who are managing supply chain have to be aware of these things. We also have areas where we have to be concerned about terrorism or unstable governments or corruption in governments, which cause lots of problems in the efficient move and distribution of goods and services. So obviously this talks about weak links. Any chain is only as strong as its weakest link, as we all well know. Something that people in the distribution and in the management of the supply chain must be aware of. So we move goods through a system we call logistics, and this is simply logistics is more than just the movement. It is planning, implementing, so it's all the steps that we have to take before we move anything, while we move something, and perhaps returning some things back to us. So it's not just movement of goods from point A to point B. It's everything we have to consider in that movement and even before. It's planning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's taking the four functions of management into consideration before we do that. Inbound logistics, bringing raw materials into the manufacturer. Materials handling is the movement of materials and goods within the manufacturer's premises. Let's talk about here on a warehouse, but it could be a factory floor, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, then this gives you different types of transportation and how they could be taken care of. You can see this graphically displayed 15.8 in your text, page 436, different kinds. We have rail, truck, pipeline, ships, and air, relative cost, speed, dependability, flexibility, frequency, etc. And then we have logistic specialist, freight forwarder, getting a number of small shipments together, create economies of scale to create one large shipment, reducing cost to everybody. This is often done by ship. We see all the containers, often done by truck, with a lot of containers on trucks, etc. And then we have intermodal shipping, different modes of transportation to complete a single long distance move. And then we have different types of intermodal shipping, piggybacking. Here we put truck trailers and put those on trains. Fishy backing, again, truck trailers, we put them on ships. And then birdie backing, we do that putting those on airplanes. And at 6:04, we have completed chapters 13, 14, and 15. I apologize about not being able to get to chapter 16 tonight. I will repeat the lecture discussion question, even though it's posed a little earlier, and that is for you to compare and contrast the differences between the production and selling marketing eras with that of the customer relationship era. So again, compare and contrast the differences between the production and selling marketing eras with that of the customer relationship era. Well, I thank you for your attention. We'll be back next week. We will cover chapters 16, 17, and 18. Thank you for your attention. I'll have this uploaded either late this evening, a few minutes from now, or early tomorrow morning. Thank you and good night.